tacos, you say? Now I'm hungry.
Yes.
What is going on? Damn you, Charsley. Hey, welcome
Tacos
back.
every day.
Yeah, it's Taco Tuesday. No, it's not. Welcome back to Inside the Parc Fermé. I know it is. I know. This is going to be a long podcast. For podcast number 780 of the Imola Grand Prix review, this is Todd.
Missouri, where they're all known to be killers of innocent men.
Yeah, we are down here. Oh, boy. We're going to talk about the race because that's what we do on race weekends. You know how we do this.
We watch one, then we talk about it. Then we watch one, then we talk about it. Come on, Todd.
That's exactly what we do. But before doing that, I have to introduce my guest. You know.
Wrecked from out of the wasteland. He's bad, he's beautiful, he's crazy. It's...
Hello, everybody. This is Paul Charsley, the International.
Some people, certain people, call him Paul Aqua Minerale, Charslini.
Oh, yes. Speaking of Aqua Minerale, see, I've got some
look
today.
at you. Speaking of Aqua Minerale, I've got some in my...
Oh, there we go.
Still or... Still?
No, sparkly.
Sparkly. You have sparkly.
Yeah, I love bubbles.
I know you do.
Yeah.
You're a bubbly personality, Paul.
Very much so.
Yes. You are.
Mm-hmm.
So... back to the old stomping ground that is Imola, Paul.
Yes, I love this track.
This is I know everybody's like, what a boring race. I just like Imola for some reason.
Imola has nearly everything to me. You know, I mean, maybe it doesn't make the most exciting, but for a car, a Formula One car and a driver, you know, it's got tight chicanes, hard braking areas, it's got sweeping turns, it's got elevation changes, it's got a long straight. I mean, it's nearly the ideal track. Maybe it doesn't make ideal races. I guess it didn't this weekend, but
right.
I think the layout and the flow of the track just has all the elements in it without trying to steal elements from other tracks.
True. Yeah, true. Yeah, I like Imola. You know, Paul, it just after spending time at Bologna and Modena and northern, I mean, just the Italians up there are just lovely people.
Yep.
And the food is amazing. And my gosh, what a sea of red. You expected it, of course. But it's just something, magic about. And I've waxed poetic until people are sick and tired of hearing me say this. But from that trip, Ferrari, it's like King Arthur. Ferrari and Italy are one. Mm-hmm. You know? And
there's not too many Ferrari haters in Italy, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. If they are, I doubt they get a discount down at the Ristorante,
Doubt they do.
Yeah. So anyway, hey, a little preamble on this weekend, Paul. Just jump in where you feel compelled.
Okay.
So judging by free practice 1, I thought I might as well stop picking Max and Red Bull to win in my fantasy GP. And finally, everybody's like, Todd, you're a Ferrari fan. You haven't been picking Ferrari to win in the first 3 races. I was like, no, I know. I'm dead last or close to in the fantasy GP.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking, all right, this weekend, I'm going to show my Ferrari colors. I'm going to pick.
You're the curse, man. You're the curse.
It was the curse. I know. Just terrible.
Remember that going to a hockey game, if you were the first ever hockey game and the team loses, you're cursed for life.
Trust me, if you want fantasy GP picks, ask me who I'm picking and pick the opposite. Good.
Yeah. Well, I missed out last week because I forgot to even make predictions.
Oh, yeah.
So I just lost half my points. But this week I have no excuse. I did make predictions and they still came out pretty bad.
It was terrible.
Once again, I picked Charles. I picked Charles. So
I thought that was the good bet. Little did I know.
Should have been.
Yeah, right. Should have been. So it was interesting. It was a wet dry race. But the interesting thing that I noticed on the sprint race, Paul, was everybody was fitted with softs, right, except for Max, right? He was on the mediums. But it was kind of interesting to watch that degradation of the soft compounds on the Ferrari versus the Red Bull, right? And so I saw that on Saturday. I thought, oh, wow, that's interesting that the Red Bull was able to manage tires better during the sprint race, and Max takes the win in the sprint race, pole position. So I thought, then come race day on Sunday, I thought, maybe that played a role in it. I'll get into it later, but anyway,
it was
the way
definitely
my head
obvious on the sprint race. I was actually doing a my second ever kart race this weekend. So I was watching it on the
saw your
small
video.
screen, and but even on the small screen, it was noticeable that the fronts on Charles's car were just toast, and he was struggling mightily with getting those front tires to work. And ultimately, you know, Max was able to run him down and go by him without too much trouble. And yes, there wasn't, after that point, you know, there's not much chance to, you know, change your car or do anything to fix it. So
Right.
yeah.
Right. Well, you know, as I said, as a wet dry race, always creates some risk reward questions. But qualifying was wet as well. So the setups may have been geared towards the dry. Hard to know, but at least
For sure they would have. Yeah.
But that's what I was thinking anyway. You know, I was even thinking kind of out of that, you know, maybe Mercedes was kind of, you know, leaning pretty much to a dry race in their setup. Hard to know, you know, not sitting on the pit wall. Hard to know how they set it up, but anyway, let's jump in the race. Let's review the race as we always do. We'll start at the top of the grid. Red Bull, Sergio Perez in P2, Max Verstappen in P1. Now, having learned a bit of a lesson from the sprint race start, Max nailed the start. So did Sergio, as a matter of fact, nailed the start of the race. The pair had things well in hand early on in the race. Max's weekend went from better to best, really, with the pole, the sprint race win, and then the Grand Prix win on Sunday, along with the fastest lap. In fact, the team scored 58 of the possible 59 points in total on the weekend. Such was the domination. So a great weekend for them. It was their first 1-2 finish, Paul, since Malaysia 2016, which
That's a long time ago.
yeah, and so thanks to the stats people at Sky for digging that up. But yeah, gosh, that's a long time. Hard to believe. But Max really, you know, had things in hand, managed the pace, managed the gap, managed the tires. Clearly, whatever was ailing him in the DNFs, the two DNFs he suffered early on, and certainly in the last race, they seem to have got on top of, because he didn't really put a foot wrong.
Well, you definitely hope they've got, because obviously it's been the technical issues that put them out, and so hopefully they did get their head around it and did fix it. One race does not make a cure, but so we'll keep our eyes out and see how that evolves as to what that issue was, and if it really is just a simple fix that they were able to finally get around. Yeah, it was. He definitely didn't have to push super hard once the race got underway. The good thing for Red Bull is Perez, you know, is doing what Perez is hired to do, and be his tail gunner, and he was able to do that and keep Charles, even if Charles had a sniff or a hope, Perez kind of kept that at bay and kind of managed Leclerc pretty easily as well, up until the point when Leclerc was bearing down on him near the end. But even so, Sergio made a little error, but not as big an error as Charles did, because Charles was just, you know, had to hang it out, wanted to hang it out at that point. So yeah, the Red Bull, this is exactly what Red Bull need to do, because they've lost a lot of points due to unreliability. So they need to make it up with both cars scoring high, and Perez getting in between Leclerc and enabling Verstappen to make those points even more important.
Yeah. You know, Sergio, as you mentioned, he had a more difficult race, sort of battling with Charles Leclerc. You know, Charles was hounding him for most of the race, really. And Sergio was saying, man, he was just so fast through some of the corners and gaining a lot on Sergio. But Sergio managed his tires for sure. And given his pace, his race strategy wasn't the sort of, as it turned out, and I compliment Red Bull, his race strategy in total wasn't that sort of sacrificial strategy to save Max, really, because Sergio was performing. I mean, he was on it, right? And Sergio mounted a charge back to P2 after his stop, after getting passed by Leclerc. And so, you know, you got to hand it. It would tell me anyway, sitting on the couch, it would tell me that Sergio is really performing quite a bit better in this year's car than he was last. And because of that, his race strategy wasn't just always throwing him to the wolves so Max can skate off in the future. I thought Sergio did a good job. Max jumped up to second in the driver's title, and the team are just 11 points behind Ferrari now. So a massive points haul for Red Bull, a big gain anyway.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Verstappen is the world champion, and he's a known quantity to Red Bull, and they know they're going to get everything out of it. The biggest step they can possibly make is with Perez. Perez in his next year, a lot more experience with the team. It's a new car, so both drivers are starting from the same standpoint. So we know Sergio works tires very well, so I think this is best option to get close, or best opportunity, should I say, to get close to Max and show him what kind of driver he really is. And yeah, maybe he's not ultimately as fast as Max right now, but he's going to have his moments. And when he doesn't have his moments, he's a lot closer.
Yeah, for sure. Second, let's talk about McLaren. Lando Norris in P3, Daniel Ricciardo down at P18. Lando had a good start past Leclerc, Paul, for P3, but was eventually repassed by Charles and settled for basically a very lonely run. But it was opportunistic race for him. He was resigned to accept fourth place, then basically trying to be best of the rest and run there. But as it was, Leclerc offered that opportunity to jump up into the podium, and Lando was there to take it. He even said before the race, I remember them interviewing Lando and saying, well, what do you expect out of the race? And he says, look, I don't think I've got the pace to run with Charles and Max, but, I think we've got to be there. And if something happens, we're going to take advantage of it. That was kind of his thought. That's exactly how it played out for Lando. A great race. And I got to tell you this, not to be a Lando sycophant, but this guy is just the full package, Paul. And if you look at the fans in Italy there for Lando, I mean, he nothing against George, but Lando is like the UK's next superstar. They just love him.
Yeah, they do. I mean, obviously, he's got more to him than just driving a car. He's got a lot of outreach there and worked on that for a couple of years.
Yeah, he did.
Whether he worked on it or it's just that's the way he is, and people are drawn to it. The TV show obviously helped as well. Likable, lovable Lando. So, I mean, what a turnaround for McLaren. That's the big thing.
The big story.
We know Lando's fast. We know Ricciardo's fast, but that car was horrendous.
Yeah.
And I'm glad they got it fixed, because that could have been a very, very long year for McLaren and Zach Brown and the whole gang. So good that they did find a fix so quickly. Hopefully it's a permanent fix, just like the Red Bull's unreliability. But yeah, it didn't have the pace for Ferrari or Red Bull. They've got to work on that. And even when you hear them talking in the press, that's not really who they're racing. Now they're racing Mercedes, which is great for them, but still racing for that third place in the championship, I think. But didn't look like they were even in the hunt for that at the beginning of the year. So,
yeah, that's the point, Paul. Yeah. Who would have expected the McLaren would be the quickest and most recovered Mercedes car on the grid, right? But the team really did turn things around given their first race of the season. And I mean, what a Herculean effort. They're struggling with some porpoising too, but they've managed to turn that car around quicker than Mercedes, the works team, has, the fastest Mercedes powered car on that grid. So what a turnaround. You mentioned Dan. I mean, he had a tough day, clouded Carlos Sainz in the opening lap, then boxed first for medium compounds, but even that second, charge
the
to the hard
I didn't even know what they were thinking at that point.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but that didn't help him recover into the points. It's a shame. No. Given how well Lando did, it's a real shame, because I think Dan would have been thereabouts.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, obviously, we know he struggles from matching Lando but last year, and but now he's right there alongside him, so that's great. But yeah, that was a little error that had big consequences. Yeah. Let's put it that way, right?
Yeah,
I mean, he hit the curb, it just pushed him out that little bit, but there is no room at that point going into the chicane in the first lap, and there with a slightly wet ground. You're not going to get that bite when you come off the curb, and the car is going to slide out and slide in. Unfortunately, took the Ferrari out as well. So
it may have gotten a little bit of a nudge from Bottas behind him too.
Well, eventually,
yeah.
I don't think Bottas knocked him into the corner.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't recall it that way, but yeah.
No, I didn't see it that way. I mean, Bottas ended up being a part of the melee as well, aftermath, should I say? I think more than anything. So,
but there was nothing untoward. I mean, Dan immediately went and apologized to Carlos. He knew. I mean, there was.
Yeah, it wasn't a first lap nutter kind of move. It was just a misjudgment. And when you're jostling around at the start of the race, those things are going to happen. Wheels are going to bang. Sometimes it could have been a wheel bang and they move on with their lives, right? But unfortunately, it was just the car came out at the wrong time and hit the wrong part of the Ferrari and ended the Ferrari's day, but then also completely ruined Ricciardo's day. And then for him to come last that's painful, and I don't know what they were trying to achieve out there with the hards at all, but it made his life even more miserable, I would say.
Yeah, it certainly did. Speaking of miserable, Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton down to P13, finished on track P14, inherited to 13 with a penalty to Ocon. You had, did I say, was that right? Penalty to Ocon or Albon?
Ocon got a penalty.
Ocon penalty got, let's see, George Russell up in P4. So George had a great start. Paul jumped from 11th to 6th, so a fantastic start on the grid, and then set about hunting down the cars ahead of him. George managed to pick off Magnussen and then take the spot when Leclerc spun, all while holding Bottas, of all people, the former guy in his seat, was hounding him. Yeah, that was fun to watch. So held off Bottas, took a terrific fourth for the team that's in serious need of points. Paul, he's finished in the top 5 all 4 races, the only driver to do it this season, and a really good run, and what can only be described as a car that has zero interest in scoring points.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? That's quite a stat there for young George, considering the team and the struggles. We think, Mercedes is just a pile, it's a piece of shit, but George is still making stuff happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly right, and it's kind of like, I don't know. I mean, I hate to say
it's a shit box,
because I mean the team keeps saying, Paul, that they think that car is on. They just got to unlock it and figure it out and all those sort of things. We're 4 races in the season; they haven't.
Still struggling. Lots of people seeing, obviously, taking that they're having to unbalance. Take some ride height out of there to try and make that smaller, but still George is still struggling a lot with it, and so is Lewis.
Well, George, didn't he say, Paul, that he was the porpoising was so bad he had chest pains and couldn't really get his breath? Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah, even when you see the DRS open, which should alleviate some of that issues, they were still bouncing around quite a lot. It's not fun to watch or see that, and hopefully there's not some kind of further consequences physically to the drivers when they're having to deal with that. But yeah, George put in a fantastic. He's really getting the best out of the car. He's making friends of the team for sure. And whatever Lewis's struggles are, whether it's motivation, whether it's just getting his head around this new car, you would expect Lewis to be able to adapt very well. We've seen Lewis struggle a little bit at the beginning of the years in the past, and then come on strong and come on very strong. So hopefully for his sake that's still in the offing. But right now, the differential between George and Lewis is probably not helping Lewis get through this first third of a season with any kind of fun factor. Not that it's all about fun, but after last year, he needed to have some big success early, I feel, to kind of wash away that stuff. And this, I think, is just going to make it worse, because he's going to be reflecting on the championship lost, and then he's going to reflect on the championship he can't win now. The illustrious 8th, I'm sure he's probably thinking, well, this is not even in the cards at this point, so what am I doing?
I know. You would struggle with motivation. I mean, as a 7-time champ coming off of 8 seasons of domination on the trot, it's got to be very, very difficult. And the way that the season ended last year has got to take the stuffing out of you anyway, right?
It's going to, I mean, Lewis is a lot stronger in the head nowadays than he was in the past, but so he's still a man,
So. Anyone would struggle with that mentally. Well, Lewis dropped back at the start, called him into the pits, maybe a little too late, if I'm honest, for slicks, but he lost time as Ocon came out in front of him. Then dropped even further back on cold tires. Lewis was behind Gasly, who was fighting Albon, and like many, he was calling for DRS. Where's the DRS, right? But when it eventually came out in lap 34, it effectively created a DRS train that he couldn't get around. And then to add insult to injury, he was passed by Verstappen on last 41. So he was lapped on lap 41, about halfway through the race, or a little more than halfway. But
there was a lot of visual focus on that, wasn't there?
God, yeah, the TV was just
it's like, can you please?
I know. Yeah,
know,
they spent like 10, 15 laps just following Lewis around with Gasly, and I'm thinking, that's for 14th. I don't know what's going on after the race.
Focusing on Toto's,
yeah, then
despair.
Toto, exactly. Then Toto, he sort of engaged after the race in a full-throated apology to Lewis. Said that what I found a little disheartening, if I'm honest, is Toto said when he was asked about the race, well, what George showed was that what their car can do in clean air, but then kind of engaged in this whole self-flagellation about not having a car worthy of a champion. This is a terrible drive, undrivable. So sorry, Lewis. All those sort of things. I agree with Toto. It's not a car worthy of a guy like Lewis, a champion like that.
Yeah.
It's a shame Lewis doesn't have the car that he's had for the last 8 seasons. I agree. But I got to be honest, it marginalizes the Herculean effort that George is putting in to score points in a car that admittedly is a greased pig. And George has beaten Lewis he's 3-1 right now. He's the reason that Mercedes is third in the Constructors' Championship. George is third in the Drivers' Championship. I mean, if we want to gloss over all that and act like whatever, and make excuses for Lewis, I'm finding that hard to believe. I'm not sure what's going on with Toto, but downplaying George's efforts. And then this kind of goes back to what I was upset with at the end of last year, not showing up at the FIA gala when you've got 2,000 men and women that have worked their tail off last year to give you your 8th championship, and you couldn't be bothered to show up. And now you're wanting to sort of say, well, yeah, I mean, George just shows what a car can do in clean air, but it's not worthy of a champion. Toto, as much as I like Lewis, I just wonder if he isn't losing sight of the forest for the Lewis trees here.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I was very upset with that thing at the end of last year. It's like, really, you're just going to take that part out of it and ignore all the whole hard work by everybody else. That's the most disappointing.
It was disappointing
of Toto I've ever been, actually, because of that. Because I generally like the guy. I think he's great for the sport. His enthusiasm is, we've seen him in some of the TV shows with the crew back in the base, building the cars and everything like that. And he has a true passion for the sport, obviously. Sure. And so I favor him in many ways. But just really going to Lewis F1 rather than representing Mercedes GP is makes it a bit uncomfortable, I would say. And definitely downplaying George is definitely not the best idea.
No, that's a bad move. George is, he's waited his whole career to get there. And you delivered a challenging car, and he's delivering points, right? Yeah. You got to respect that, folks. I'm not taking anything away from Lewis. We could argue all day whether his head's in the game, whether last year took the stuffing out of him, whether he realized. Look, here's the bottom line. The guy's a 7-time world champion. Can he be afforded a little deference for having some difficult races? Hell yes, he can. Could he be afforded to having kind of an off season? Hell yes, he could. He's an incredible driver by anyone's measure. But I think you got to acknowledge that, but you can't discount what George is putting up and keeping Mercedes at least in the top 3 in both championships. And that's down to George. And you got to honor that. You got to respect that, because whether it's the end of this year or the end of next year, Lewis will retire. And you've got to get George capable and mentally ready to battle the likes of Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen. These are his peers, and as much as folks make it sound like the real big battle is Lewis versus Max, Lewis isn't Max's peer. He happens to be was the current world champion, but Max's peers are Charles Leclerc, right? It's George Russell. It's Pierre Gasly. It's Lando, right? It's that crew, Esteban Ocon, Alex Albon. These are his peers. Lewis is the old guard, and so you got to approach it that way. I'm not, like I said, I'm not taking the piss to Lewis. I'm just saying I find that abrasive, but just me. Alfa Romeo, Valtteri Bottas, P5, Zhou Guanyu, P15. Bottas had a great race going, passing Magnussen for P6, running well into the points, Paul. He had that sticky wheel gun. That cost him like 8 seconds in the pit lane.
He doesn't
and
like
it's
that
a
right front change, does he? Remember
No, he
Monaco?
doesn't.
Oh.
Yeah, Monaco, right?
Yeah.
And that's a long pit lane already. So losing an additional 8 seconds is tough, but got his head down, got on with business, clambered his way back up through the field, challenging Russell in the waning laps for a P5. Just a great race for Valtteri. Looks like a Finn inspired, I might add.
Yeah, he's really taken this new lease of life. I mean, watching him just hound onto Russell and being ahead of Lewis. I mean, he's got to be thinking, "Wow, did I make the right move?" I mean, literally, he could be struggling as well. But it definitely, a change of scenery helps. And not what I expected from Bottas. I mean, I thought, he'd been beaten up, with Reed's so long at Mercedes that he was just going to come over to another team and just kind of continue that fare. And maybe it was an upgrade from Kimi and Giovinazzi, but not much of one. But I think he's been inspiring.
Well, if you thought that it was the notion, if you thought, Paul, it was that notion of kind of moving to Sauber and putting him out to pasture, I think this is a pretty good answer. That may not be the case.
Yeah, he's doing himself all kinds of good, right? I mean, in that Alfa Romeo, which has not really done a whole lot in the past few seasons, had a couple of smatterings of fairly decent performances, but by far this is the most consistent higher performance by this team since I think it became Alfa Romeo, quite honestly, and it's down to Bottas and Zhou has been backing it up, maybe not this race, but literally been backing up with his own driving.
Well, and to talking about Zhou, he started from the pit lane, Paul, due to Saturday's crash. Okay, had an error there. Okay. He's had 3 good races on the trot this weekend, not so much, but, he made his way up to P15. And I got to think, as a rookie, having that incident starting from pit lane, you could lose a little bit of your composure. He didn't. Stayed in there, stayed out of trouble all day, wasn't out there, slam banging into everybody, trying to overdrive it. As a measured race. Yeah, P15, not a great result, but he's a rookie, and I think he's still acquitting himself very well.
Yeah, and I think, it's the general how the track went from being
wet, dry,
damp, to dry line, made it very hard for people to move forward. I mean, there was always, offline was always a very bad choice. Whether it was being on the intermediates, it was always drying, so you're always compromising that braking zone. I think it was very hard, and you had to do a lot of jumping with in and out laps and pit stops, etc. So
to that point, Paul, I think I have it later in my notes, so if I repeat myself, apologies, but I'll bring it up here. I think this was the whole DRS issue, and not bringing DRS into play until lap 34. And I think Carlos Sainz is right. When he said, well, they asked him about it. And he said, I think after last year's dangerous crash between Bottas and George Russell, you remember that one? Very dangerous, very high-speed crash, because as soon as the dry line formed, they brought DRS in. But trying to pass on the wet on this track, it kind of begat that very dangerous situation. And I don't think the FI wanted to do that again this year. So they weren't just looking for a single dry line and then woohoo, DRS. I think they were waiting for a considerable drying of the track before they were going to bring that in because of last year's crash. So I think you're right to point out that at this track, I think it is kind of difficult with that single dry line.
Yeah, and I don't know the parameters of when they're going to put DRS on or off or on, but it became a very much like a street circuit single lane for a very long time till nearly the end. So
Ferrari, Charles Leclerc, P6, Carlos Sainz, as we mentioned, a DNF. Charles had a good start on Saturday, but neither Ferrari really got a good start on Sunday, and this left Carlos in the midfield and in the clutches of Dan Ricciardo, who punted him wide, as Paul mentioned, on the opening lap and into the gravel in a DNF. But that certainly wasn't the way he wanted to celebrate his new 2-year deal with Ferrari. But maybe Carlos, if there's any criticism, maybe a better qualifying effort on Saturday may have spared you the DNF if you weren't mired down there in midfield. However, Charles Leclerc lost a spot to Perez at the start, and while he pressured Sergio the entire race, I wondered if the late stop, Paul, for those soft compounds may have been a concern, as even Charles radioed and thought maybe they should have gone for the mediums. And I was thinking back to Saturday's degradation that they had on those softs, I was wondering, not that I would doubt their strategy, but I was wondering if that was the right call, if they shouldn't have gone for the mediums. The reason being, because I thought about Saturday. So he was trying really hard, Paul, to stay within Sergio's DRS range so he could try to get that. And he said, in the end, he was just too greedy. He should have stayed there for the points. He lost 7 additional points that he really shouldn't have. Not how Ferrari wanted to finish their home Grand Prix. It does make you wonder if the Red Bull's floor upgrades this weekend may not have clawed back a little bit of pace deficit that they had. Or is it track specific? I don't know. But recall, Ferrari chose not to bring their upgrades this weekend in Imola because there was a sprint race, limited Friday practice running that they would have liked to had to vet their upgrades. Red Bull did bring their upgrades. Question is, will we see a different Ferrari in Miami? Time will tell.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one because why would you bring your upgrades to a street track you've never been to?
Yeah. And I don't know if they will, but
yeah, I mean, that sounds like a curious place to bring them also, quite honestly. And yes, I get it. You don't get a lot of time for evaluation purposes, and you're throwing a bit of the unknown out even when you get to the race as to what you're really getting out of the car. So yeah, it was a tough deal. Obviously, Sainz, what are we going to do about Sainz? I actually picked him to win the race, honestly, because I thought there's no possible way you can have that bad a start to the season.
And
he's
he looked
driving
good
the
on
best
Friday.
car on the grid. And it just, he made a mistake and made up for it in the sprint race somewhat. But that's still his mistake, putting him back there to enable Daniel Ricciardo to,
that's right,
get in his way, right? You pay for mistakes, whether it's, and ultimately it was Daniel's fault, but it was Sainz's mistake that put him in that position. The further in the field you get, as we saw with him in Australia, the more likely is for something bad to happen to you, whether you try and force something because you get desperate, or there's just more metal and cars and tires around to bump into you. So it was a shame. Hopefully he can get around it, because the bigger that gap gets, the less likely he's going to have a lot of opportunity to win races this year, in deference to Charles scoring points.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I thought it was all over last year, but last race, but I think they were still kind of giving him the chance. But it's going to be awfully tough for them, to allow Carlos to fight tooth and nail with Leclerc.
Well, especially with the points that Leclerc lost this week, right? Makes it even more difficult.
Exactly. The closer Verstappen gets to it, the less comfortable they are with giving away points. They shouldn't be anyway, because we know these things come and go and ebb and flow. So you should never ever be comfortable with any kind of margin, and Ferrari in historically have not been, right? As right. I don't know what Schumacher had, like 150 points over his next rival, and still Barrichello had to wave him by.
That's right.
Till they sealed it. Yeah. Till they sealed it.
Yeah.
And Charles, tough deal. Just took too big a bite out of that chicane. I did the same thing actually this weekend. Luckily, I did throw in the barriers, but I did lose a lot of time. But you're just trying to start. There's just a limit to how much curb you can take, till then it just starts a momentum thing, and it puts your car off. No, you're no longer just driving on the tire and the downforce of the car. You're actually hop skipping around, and at that point, you don't know what's going to happen, and you bounce the wrong way. He was very, very lucky, in fact, to actually get 80 points after that error, but he was pushing. Ferrari like that, right? Gilles Villeneuve all the way up. Ferrari like a guy that's going to go for it, and that's exactly what he did. He got close. It was an interesting strategy to go for these extra points. I don't know. I'm always uncomfortable with going for the fastest lap, but because you get a sticky wheel nut like Bottas did, and with how many points you get, that 1 point, I know it's significant because it was significant last year, and you can't count it out. But it's like, I don't know.
It is a risk reward thing,
Yeah, when you have that comfort margin with which he does it in championship, do you really?
Yeah.
If you're trying to chase a championship, maybe you do. Every point you're just trying to clamber back. But if you've got that kind of cushion, maybe you just kind of sit. But either way, when they came in the pits and put on softs, I thought that was a bad move from the very beginning.
Well, and even Max reacting to that coming in, it's like, ooh, I don't know, man, you could have a sticky wheel, throw the win away, it's tough.
Yeah, it's gonna happen.
Yeah,
and it hasn't really happened yet, but it's gonna happen.
It will. Yeah.
And at that point, you threw away 25 points to try and win one.
Yeah.
I don't like it. Even in IMSA, we have qualifying points, right? But it's a 10th of a win. So you add 10 races up, that's a race win in points. So I don't know. And even then, the race is still super more important than getting those little extra points. But yeah, it was a tough deal. I think mediums was the way to go, especially because that was kind of setting the stage of what Sergio was then going to do.
Yeah, right.
And then what Sergio wouldn't have come in and put softs on if Leclerc had put on mediums, and ultimately a medium was a better choice for that distance before the end of the race.
Right. Tough call. AlphaTauri, Pierre Gasly, P12, Yuki Tsunoda, P7. You get a good start, gaining 2 places, had enough pace to keep him, as basically the roadblock between the midfield and the leaders. So he was kind of leading that pack, but it wasn't it wasn't enough pace to well, I guess it was. He did pass Stroll and Magnussen and Vettel.
Yeah, he made some great moves.
Yeah. So he had pace to pass Stroll, Magnussen, Vettel, scored P7. Right. Great. I mean, very inspired drive. I just thought he looked fantastic out there.
Yeah, and as we said, it was difficult to make moves.
Yeah,
and Yuki to make that much gain, I think he had a great weekend.
Yeah.
He looked great on the practices and in the qualifying race. I mean, I think overall, this was his best weekend in Formula One right now. And then you got to compare it to his teammate, who is very comparable as one of the top F1 drivers, and be able to be that far ahead of him. I think Yuki's got to be extremely happy, and so is the whole team.
Yeah, got to be. Well, Pierre, like Lewis, he was stuck in that DRS train. And while he said it wasn't very hard to keep Lewis behind him, he couldn't seem to find his way around Albon's Williams, right?
Right. Who wasn't in DRS.
Right, who was not. Which I think is an interesting thing. If you think you had Albon at a Williams, of all things, with no DRS, Pierre, AlphaTauri with DRS, Lewis with DRS behind him. And so that whole thing right there was just weird,
It was.
That kind of transpired. In the end, it was Pierre's deficit during qualifying that really made life kind of difficult for him.
It's interesting how close with the rule change, how close some of these cars are to each other in pace that literally you can't get by them. We see this in GT3 racing a lot, just because there's the BOP and they try and equalize everyone all after every race and before every race. But in Formula One, you don't have that, so everyone's going for their own speed. And it's interesting that should occur, where there just was neither. So many of these cars didn't have that much advantage or that much disadvantage to make passing a little bit more available. So, but Albon to hold them off while they're using DRS was pretty impressive. But, I'm wondering if they're going to add more DRS zones next year just because of this issue. But hopefully,
Yeah, hopefully not. Aston Martin, Lance Stroll, P10, Sebastian Vettel, P8. The team desperately needed points this weekend. And to be fair, they look good in the wet, as both Vettel and Stroll tend to be good in the wet. And they were managing the heat in their tires. All the teams were really, those inters were getting pretty hot as it dried out, and they managed that pretty well as the track dried. They seemed to struggle a little bit more as it dried out than they did in the wet. They seemed to look a little more competitive in the wet. But Vettel drove decent race. First points for him, given he's had very limited seat time in that car. That's good. And Lance did a decent job holding Lewis off. And in the cooler, wet conditions seemed to favor Lance a little bit more than maybe as it dried out. But anyway, a dual points finish for the team that desperately needed it.
Yeah, Lance does pretty good in changeable conditions for some reason. It's like he's got a dream for that all the time. But he made one move where it was really dodgy, really wet, that he went offline to make it happen and didn't throw it off the road, which is surprising enough. And Vettel have a quiet race, a competitive race, and to score points. I think that's something he desperately needs.
Yeah, for sure. Haas F1, Mick Schumacher, P17, Kevin Magnussen, P9. Mick had a tussle with Alonso that dropped him back to 17th. Then it was all really about recovering from there. And to be honest, he had a bit of just a ragged race, to be honest with you, given that he started 10th, Paul. That was his best starting position in his F1 career. So, yeah, just kind of a bit of a ragged weekend all around for Mick.
Yeah, I mean, mentally, depends on the driver. If you're used to being at the back, there's really not a lot of pressure on you. But once you're comparing yourself to Magnussen as your teammate, and then you're moving up and you've got 10 Formula One cars behind you, and you're right in the midst of it, it changes the game a little bit. And, if you might try to make something happen that doesn't happen, it could be just simple, a mistake just happened. But there is going to be adjustments as this Haas remains competitive, fairly competitive, and Mick gets more and more opportunity fighting out with a lot more people, and where strategy and literally every lap is going to be crucial to a finish position, where he didn't really have to worry about that. He just had to worry about beating Marzipan, right? So it's going to be a different year for him. He did have the year under his belt to get experience, but there's still going to be some adjustments being competitive in Formula One rather than just being in Formula One.
That's a great point. It's a great point, because you got a hell of a measuring stick with Kevin, who had a better race. Good start, making up a few places. They were a lap or two late with the switch to slicks. That left a lot of work for Kevin to do. But he still brought it home in the points in P9. They scored points in 3 of their first 4 races this year, and that's a much better than last year. But but anyway, in the points, Kevin, the team should be elated to have Kevin back. He's delivering.
It seems like the car can lay down a few good laps, new tires, and it seems to fade just a little bit. And Kevin does the best he can. That's kind of what we saw him kind of gradually fall his way back. But obviously still night and day from last year. So
for sure.
Good for them. They've got to be a lot of smiles in that team.
Yeah, for sure. Williams, Alex Albon, P11, Nicholas Latifi, P16. Latifi spent most of the day fighting with Joe. He said it was important to build his confidence, which, to be critical, you've been in F1 now a couple of seasons. Like, I'm hoping that the confidence would be there. He's kind of talking, I don't know, that just struck me as a rookie. Yeah, you're not a rookie anymore. You should be. And then Alex comes out of nowhere having a season off, and, he's damn near into P10 in the top 10 again. Yep. Now, I get it. He inherited the P10 on the last race, but he nearly made it there on merit, fighting off Gasly and Hamilton for P11.
Right.
I mean, it's a very good drive by
without
Alex.
the aid of DRS. I mean, they needed DRS to stay up with Albon.
That's right. So I don't want to overlook just how impressive that drive was.
It certainly was impressive. In his hands, he's doing himself all kinds of good. And Latifi. I mean, yes, he's not a rookie, but every driver can get wretched with confidence.
Sure.
And whether it's, you've been in it 10 years or been in it 10 months.
Yeah.
So I can see that side of it. but he needs to get over it.
Yeah.
We've seen him have a couple of good races in the past, but not that many. And he definitely has a good measuring stick now with Albon, so he needs to get on it.
Right. Let's see. That leaves Alpine, Fernando Alonso, DNF, Esteban Ocon, P14. Alonso clashed with Schumacher, which damaged his side, and while it seemed okay during the safety car period, a big old chunk of the side flew off, exposing a gaping hole, and he retired. Fernando said he knows it wasn't intentional, but he make a comment. He said, I feel like I could be on 20 to 30 points in the championship since Australia, but I only have 2. Not happy.
It did seem like it was more competitive car, but that results looks very bleak for them. But I don't think it reflects how fast that car was. We know the mid pack is tight, so I'd probably agree with him, quite honestly.
Yeah, I would too.
Yeah.
Ocon started towards the back, was charging through the field. Then he had that unsafe release. Not his fault. And he came out in front of Hamilton. That garnered a penalty that dropped him back 3 paces at the end of the race. And he took 14 that Hamilton inherited P13 because of that penalty. So not a good result for the team, given that their CEO was in attendance that weekend. Ouch.
Yeah, but ultimately that kind of really screwed with Lewis's race too, right? Because Ocon,
did.
even though he gets the penalty,
you're
still in front the whole race, and that DRS train, he was kind of a part and parcel of that. So it's that it was a close thing with the release, and I know the desperation to get the car out there because it means everything. But that was a shame for him to get the penalty, but also everyone else that had to suffer behind him that maybe wouldn't have seen him otherwise. Yeah,
for sure. All right, well, let's give out some awards because that's kind of what we do. The first one we do is Move of the Race. Move of the Race, Paul. Who'd you give it to?
I'm kind of giving it to 2 people on the same person, and I like all of them. But and we're talking about Magnussen doing a great job. He was falling back, but we saw it was fun to watch the hunt in a non-DRS part of the race of both Russell and Bottas to get around Magnussen, and obviously we saw Russell, hound him, made a move, it didn't come off, then hound him, and then just set him up and finally get the job done. It was a little easier for Bottas. Maybe he learned some stuff from what Russell did, but either one, Magnussen is not an easy guy to pass, and it was I just enjoyed that part of the race, just watching that build up and what Russell was thinking, what Bottas was thinking, in order to set that pass up from many corners back, many laps back, to actually get it done. And very important passes they were.
I was kind of torn on this. I did like Red Bull's strategy for Perez and how Perez executed that. I thought that was really well done, because they definitely were in the clutches of Leclerc. With Perez for most of the race, and then they lost the position to Leclerc, and then they boxed him for dries first, and I thought that everything worked out real well for Sergio on that side. I'm compelled to give it to the Ted and Ant paddock walk show, which was hilarious to watch. Which was hilarious, trying to watch Anthony keep up with Ted and his frenetic pace, back and forth, up and down. Let's go over here. Let's talk about this. How Ted can be. And Ant's like walking around trying to keep up with him. And Ted will turn on a dime and walk the other way. And then Ant's like trying to hustle and catch up. It was hilarious to watch.
I read a good thing about Ant in the Motorsport magazine. I don't know if you still get it. Did you see that?
I do. I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, it's really cool about him. Very, very interesting. Good stuff.
Great guy.
Davison. Yeah, definitely a great guy. It was interesting because I was watching the F1 feed. I don't get the ESPN. So,
with Will and Julian.
Yes. But they had a couple of people at the beginning. They had Oscar. What's his name? He's the Renault factory.
Piastri.
Yeah. Very, very eloquent guy, very knowledgeable, and very good at putting forth the point. And a lady that I'd seen before,
Laura
and she
Winter.
wasn't on there. What's that?
Laura Winter.
Yes, she was good.
She does a great job.
Yeah, those two. I mean, I don't like the F1 TV crew, but I like those two, and I was glad there was a lot of them in the pre-race. So
Yeah. Well,
at
she's
least
a
there was a
pro.
light spark to
I
it.
mean, she's
Yeah.
actually a professional broadcaster. She's done football and
She didn't just
everything
walk
else.
on and say,
No.
I like cars. and
Which was
stuff.
which is,
Yeah.
and I'm having a debate with the captain over the website, bless his heart, but it's the Naomi thing just throws me. This is the premier broadcast team for Sky Sports globally, and you get a driver, and it's that's won a few Clio Cup races and explaining what Charles Leclerc did wrong, and I don't know. I feel like she should have cut her teeth in F3 and F2 broadcasting because she's not a broadcast. And then by contrast, you get a gal like Laura Winter, who is a professional broadcast, asking fantastic questions, totally heads up relevant questions of what happened on track. That makes sense, so I don't know what Sky's doing there, but a good pickup for Will and team.
Yeah, and to think that the depth of F1 talent and experience that they have available to them, why would you do that?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't understand that at all.
I mean, Ant Davidson's doing the sim work for Mercedes, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Paul DeResta is racing in DTM. Paul's the real thing.
Right. They've all spent many hours and years in Formula One, and Jenson Button or whatever. Why would you bring in a
I don't know
Clio Cup driver? I don't know. You may
know.
as well bring Paul Charles in, for crying out loud.
Might as well. I don't understand that. But anyway. Let's see. Next up is Donkey the Race. Yes.
We'll do it live.
All right, Paul. Who'd you get?
All right. Well, I was debating Lewis and the Merc package. Not taking them anywhere, but I'm going to throw it at the Ferrari drivers because they both made big errors.
It pains me to say
in front
that.
of the Tifosi.
I know.
At various times on the weekend that just put paid to many points on the table for the team.
Let this be a marker. Everyone knows I'm a Ferrari fan. I'm giving Donkey to Charles Leclerc. Everybody, you're always picking on Lewis. No, I'm not. Charles Leclerc, you cannot throw 7 points away like that. You cannot do it. If you want to win the championship, and Lewis should be a perfect example of that, Max, you just can't do it.
Yeah.
And especially in front of the Tifosi, you just can't do it, man. Let's see. Finally, driving the race. All right, Paul.
I'm giving it to my buddy Yuki.
Oh, Yuki, a great
I think
pick.
I've given him Donkey of the Race a few times. So
yes, you
kudos
have.
where kudos is due.
Yes,
Yuki.
you have.
Well done,
That's a great
sir.
pick. Yeah, it was a great pick. I'm giving it to George Russell.
Very nice also.
If you watched and listened to the onboard porpoise, you could hear it going bang, 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 bang. That poor guy. And you know what? If Toto isn't going to give George a little love, and everybody else is busy, making excuses and placating and trying to keep Lewis all buoyed and excited and, Team LH forever. If nobody's going to say it, I will, damn it. George Russell is doing a hell of a job for that team. And he's the reason they're in third in both championships. George, I think you do a great job and you deserve the accolades, my friend.
Enjoyed your award.
Yes, exactly. Let's do some.
You've got mail.
All right, first up, Brock asks, "Hey, Todd Paul, I've been listening for quite a while, for quite a few years now, and I know your opinion on DRS. Yes, you do. During the Imola race, we saw an exciting half race with no DRS and changing track conditions. We have seen closer racing this year, and the DRS seems to be very overpowered as well. My question for you, are the new regulations enough for Formula One to remove DRS system? Would Formula One even want to remove the excitement from the racing? Thank you for your occasional insightfulness. You're welcome, Brock. Thanks for that. It is a great question, Paul, because
what I draw from that, there was what was that last little comment about the racing? Yes, even want to remove that excitement from the racing. DRS is not racing. It's changing the position. I'm sorry. Still is. Always
Still
has
is.
been.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And you could see. I thought, I'm not going to get way off into the long grass on this because everybody will come at me with hate mail like they always do. I'm an old idiot and jerk and all that, but
Sorry, my mom just gets crazy.
I know she's out of control. It's like, dude. But this race showed, where's the DRS? All the drivers just waiting for DRS so we can pass.
Mm-hmm.
There were a few of them out there who said, the hell with it. I'm going for it. And they were passing.
I'm not going to wait. Yeah.
And they're not going to wait for DRS. I maintain that race, because the cars can race closer together, we saw the race resign itself to the two key factors that have always, until DRS came, have always been Formula One and granular to Formula One. It's down to the delta between the performance and setups of the cars and the drivers. And that's what and if they can't pass, then it's either the car or the driver isn't getting it done. If they're in a better car, the driver isn't getting it done. But the bottom line is you got to make it happen. And you saw some drivers trying to lunge in there and try to make it happen. I thoroughly enjoyed before the DRS came out, because then when it finally came out, it didn't make any impact. It was just a DRS train that prevented Lewis from actually, sticking his nose in and making it happen. And I got challenged on that because I kind of felt like Lewis probably would have got around Gasly by forcing an error. And it is Lewis. And, I kind of felt like he would have.
Yeah.
All the drivers just sit around and wait for DRS.
Yeah.
Now, if there isn't, you're going to see actual lunging and actual passing.
Yeah. And some of them never raced F1 without DRS.
No, that's right.
So
They've never not had it.
So to answer the question, I think give it a go. Let's take DRS out of the equation on some of these tracks where it just makes it completely stupid.
Yeah.
If it's a matter of Monaco or something, okay, whatever. But I would really like to see them try. And it is nice to be able to watch the race without being frustrated by the DRS, just the zoom by, and it breaks my heart every time I see it. And I think they've got the rules where the cars can follow it close. I think that's very obvious. And that's why the DRS has become even more powerful, because the DRS was there when they couldn't do that.
Right.
I think, maybe that they should at least try and analyze which tracks are have made a mockery of the DRS, basically.
Right. And if you wanted to, maybe just shorten them so they can kind of catch up, but not.
Yeah, but that still doesn't do it for me. It needs to be there or not.
I'm trying to compromise here.
That's why I was saying at the end, it was like let make everything a DRS zone and equalize everything.
Then it equalizes everything.
But if some tracks don't allow that, there's not enough straights to go back and forth and back and forth. I'd rather it not be there at all. I'm not saying that's my choice, but I think they definitely need to at least have a trial, like they've got these sprint races. Let's have 2 or 3 races where we don't have DRS and see what the hell happens.
Yeah, I agree. Let's see next. Hey, Gigi the Cat. Yes, he made a statement about street races. He says, "Am I the only one that likes street races? With Monaco, Jeddah, street circuits in general lead me to believe that I'm the only lover of street circuits." He said, "Yes, I understand all the arguments against them, but he made some great points. There's no BS on track limits. Driver concentration must go up. Drivers are absolutely amazing." Skill that comes out to the fore when you're at a street race. He made some great points. You can go see his points in the mailbag, but I agree with you, Gigi. It's not that I'm not anti-street race at all. It's been interesting to see Formula One try to find the perfect street race, right? So you had Monaco, and Monaco is just Monaco. It is what it is, for better or worse. I happen to love Monaco, but as they started doing more streets, so Singapore, right? So it was a little higher speed, a night race, those kind of things. Then it led to Baku, very high speed, Jeddah, very high speed street race. And then a lot of people saying, well, wait a minute, that may be too high speed. So they've kind of tried to find that perfect marriage between street race, high speed, passing opportunities. I think it's been interesting to watch.
Yeah, and it depends on what brought you to Formula One and what Formula One is to you as well. It kind of goes back to the DRS zone, right? There's a lot of new fans that have never seen F1 race without DRS, and it's the norm, right?
Right.
And what when we began watching Formula One, it wasn't just about who passed who. It was about the beauty of the cars, the beauty of the driving, the speed of the cars. Look at these drivers just take this thing with tons of horsepower and, just manhandling it around a corner and fighting tooth and nail against each other. Even if it's not a lot of passing, they're doing that every corner, every lap for all the races.
Yeah.
And if you can see through that, then you can appreciate Formula One, even if there isn't a pass in the whole race. And most of the time, Monaco, there isn't, right? But we love to watch Monaco because we do see them bring the car to the edge without, as he says, without the runoffs, etc. And it really does test a driver's focus and concentration. And if you're at a street circuit and you see that, you really see, how skillful these people are. I loved racing street circuits. I loved racing. My favorite street circuit was the Miami Grand Prix. I got to do it, which was great. But this was when it was down by the boats, not the fake boats on the painted asphalt. Right. This is through the harbor, and it was, through the terrain. We've talked about Spa, and then just laying down a pathway, and that became, Spa without a lot of thought behind it.
Yeah.
And so I love street races. I love street races actually in a town rather than in a parking lot, because then it's just about how did they lay the Jersey barriers out, and that takes a bit of the street circuit, because they really should bring the track to the city rather than build a parking lot track near a city.
I agree.
That's not as exciting for me. So
I agree. Brad Sunshine asks, let's see, hold this question to Paul way in. Okay, I'm holding it. The question is about race starts. I've been intrigued by the evolution of several drivers and how well they get off the line. You may recall a few years ago, Nico Rosberg would typically get the better jump on the line than beat Lewis. Lewis obviously spent significant energy perfecting his starts since then. He's been amazing, and I feel it's one of his many strengths. I agree. He's very strong at that. Last year, even when Max got pole, especially in the last 8 races, Lewis would smoke Max to turn 1 more than not. While Max can get good starts, Lewis is very consistent. You read about Lewis changing the thickness of the material of his gloves, the configuration of the clutch levers, etc. How does Max or Charles or whoever get to the point that Lewis is, or where I think he is consistently good starts?
It's tough to say, because I mean, back in the day when you had a manual gearbox and a clutch, and there was, obviously you had different clutches you could use, etc. But there was a lot more driver in the start, the anticipation, how you're bleeding in the throttle, how you're easing off the clutch, how you're shifting
time
all the way. Reaction time and feeling the grip. Here nowadays, they're doing all these tests. They end up pit lane to get the computers to tell them how much grip the tire has,
point is,
and how to dial in the bike point, etc. And the driver has a lot finer line of success there, right? It's success of the driver, but also success of the engineering team behind who developed that clutch system and told the driver how to do things and that. So there's a finer line, but the driver still has an equation in there. And sometimes it shows off even worse because it's just a couple of things they can do. And if they get it that a little bit wrong, how they lift their little pinky finger off of that clutch lever, right, can make a big difference. So it's not just the drivers that are doing that. It's really the whole team, as in all Formula One, putting the car out there and how well that driver is going to launch the car. Yes, reaction time's there, but it really has a lot to do with the engineering behind the car, not just the driver's reaction and how he's applying the throttle to get out of the start box.
I would agree, and I'm not disagreeing, Brad. I do think Lewis is great at starts, but I think the Mercedes in general in the past has been really good. To Paul's point, it's the way the engineers design the clutch, the bite points, how to release it, how to avoid wheel spin, anti-stall, all those things that they've done that made that Mercedes such a daunting car off the line. And I think during the last few years, it's always been kind of an area that Red Bull struggled a little bit with their car. But There is a driver element to it for sure, and I think Lewis got very good at it.
Yeah, maybe
I
saw
think
how Lewis had that different method of
yes,
holding the steering wheel. He
holding
had
the
his
steering wheel,
he
right?
had his always had hand on the top of
Yeah,
the steering wheel to release the clutch, as opposed to
right,
here, which gave him more feel and control, and that did help
right.
him. Yeah,
And there's no doubt he worked hard on that.
yeah.
I think Fernando has traditionally always been really good at starts. And there are drivers up and down that grid that just seem to really find that sync with the way their car is engineered, how it reacts to starts, its starting procedure, everything involved. I just think there's some drivers that really are on top of that.
Yeah.
So it's a great point, though, Brad. I appreciate that. And
Yeah.
finally, Miles asked, it seems that the new cars are very slow to turn in. Are there certain drivers you think this is hurting a lot? Vettel seems to be one, and I'm sure there are others. How hard is it for a driver to adjust their style? Do they have to go so far as relearn how they drive? Is this something that can be done in a sim, or does it require track time to accommodate? So, Paul, you know this far as a real race car driver, you know this far better than I do. I will say,
Yeah.
having spoken with Vettel on a few occasions, yeah, he does not like waiting on a car.
Right.
And he told me that on more than one occasion, twice we were talking about it, and I was asking him about it, and he said, "Yeah, I don't like a understeer. He hates it because he's just waiting and waiting and waiting for that car to finally turn in, and he doesn't like it."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm going through the same thing with my little karting stuff, trying to adapt my sports car tendencies to driving a kart against a bunch of 18-year-old kids. But so I feel the pain. So yeah, how do you adapt? Can a driver adapt? Absolutely. The team also has to work with them to adapt the car to try and get the car to do as much of that as possible without deference to speed. Because sometimes a driver's style and the rule package that is around may not mesh.
Yeah.
It's like, I like a car that's loose all the time. Well, yeah, that's great, but that makes you a second foot slower than everybody. So that's not going to work. So we're going to have to rethink this thing a little bit. So yeah, so certain drivers like a pointy car. They're going to have to try and work with the engineers to try and get it as pointy as it can be. If it never gets to that point, in deference to lap time, then yeah, they're just going to have to adapt. And generally, through a career, if you've been a karter to a Formula Forder to a Formula 3 to jumping in GTs maybe and back, you've had to do that at some point in time.
Yeah.
Not all Formula cars drive the same way and demand the same attitude from what you're giving it. So a professional driver has to be adaptable to somewhat to get the best out of the car. So these are new rule packages. The car's constantly evolving too, still remember. The team doesn't even know the car very well. So it's not like, well, this is how the car should be, and you just need to drive it. They're both kind of finding their way right now.
Right.
So
and the tires are a major factor too.
Right. The whole package, everyone's still learning. And so they're trying to get to that point. Most drivers want a car when you turn the wheel, it's going to go exactly where you want it to go. Some drivers want it to rotate a little bit earlier in the corner, but Jenson Button was one that didn't like that back end, some swapping around, and he would drive under that oversteer to get the best out of it, and he did on certain occasions. But very difficult for a team to have two drivers who really want opposite things and get the car to work for both of them as well. So there's things they can do. They're gonna analyze the data a lot. They're gonna adapt. Easier for newer drivers to adapt than older drivers, I would say.
Think of like Daniel Ricciardo. It's been a real struggle for him because the McLaren's radically different.
Yeah. Well, he's actually, he's had trouble adapting to new cars from the day he left Red Bull, basically.
Yeah, with Renault and then McLaren. Yeah.
Right. He struggled a bit, but he's getting head around it. So he's had to be maybe more adaptable than others.
And,
but
look how quick Charles Leclerc got on top of it with Ferrari. I'd say somewhere in the middle might be Sergio Perez. It took him a little longer than 5 or 6 races that he thought. Took him kind of, first, 2/3 of the season to kind of get on top of that Red Bull.
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with getting the right feel from the car to know what it's doing. And if you jump from one team to another, the feel of the car is going to be radically different. So what
Right.
does this feeling mean versus that feeling? Because this feeling in the other car meant I was about to crash.
Yeah, right.
Right. So all these little things kind of start building up your basically seat of the pants feel and know exactly how to react to a situation that you're feeling in the right manner. So
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, that does it for this podcast with what we think about the Imola Grand Prix, but let us know what you think. Go to theparcfermé.com. Share your opinion. Just do it with decorum and civility as always. And a huge thank you to our Patreon supporters like Gigi the Cat. And we couldn't and wouldn't do this podcast without you. So we are very grateful for your support. You can go to our website on the right-hand side if you wish to support us. There's a link over there. It says support us, believe it or not.
Right there or there. Could be there.
Yeah, or it's at the bottom in the footer too.
Oh, down there. Okay.
So there or there. So anyway, you can do that. If you like the podcast, go over to Apple iTunes, give us some love, give us a good rating over there. As always, we will be back next weekend to talk Formula One news, and then in a couple of weeks' time, Paul and I will have the honor of reviewing the very first Miami Gardens Grand Prix. Until that time, this is Todd, aka Negative Camera, saying so long.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.